Hello everyone, John Maher here. It is Thursday, 27th of August, and the rain is falling at last. But this is your Grass10 update on the dairy edge. So I suppose that's the headline for today. Rain falling and to remain broken or unsettled for the next while. Grass growth will now start to increase from now on. I suppose last week the average growth was about over 30 kilos, was an average farm cover of about 500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, or 166 per livestock unit. Now that's the average for the country. So let's be clear here, there is a huge variation in both grass growth and grass supply before we all get too carried away with the rain arriving. But look, for the records, Donegal, Mayo, Sligo, like they grew into the 70s and 80s. The northwest corner, like they had a good week. They're not short of grass, generally speaking. And then if I was to go to Carlow, it grew on average 6 kilos per hectare per day. That's the story of the country for the summer of 2026. The autumn's about to arrive. Things are changing. It'll bring opportunity for some. For others, it's maybe a fraction late, but we'll take what we can get at this stage and try and get some level of grass growth going again and a level of grass recovery as we enter into the autumn to try and shorten the winter period, which will be the aim now, I suppose. When you look at the figures then for the diet for last week, it was about, on average across the country, 10 kilograms of grass, 5 kilos of meal, and 4 kilos of silage. The average pre-grazing yield is about 1,000. But there are farms who have just no grass, and there are farms who have grass and surplus, and we will be milking bales in the north and west. Anyway, look at the dry matters. Grange, Moore Park, Oak Park, all around the mid-20s, 24-25% dry matter the week gone by. Athenry was a little different, 18%. Tells me the grass is growing up there. I suppose the predicted rainfall for this week is about 1.5 to 2 inches for most of the country, with Kilkenny, Tipperary and Laois forecasted. I stress that to be on 2 inches. The weather into the weekend is to remain broken and into early next week. Wouldn't be 100% clear on the rainfall, but the numbers at this stage look promising enough for a lot of farms to get a level of recovery. But before we start talking there, everyone needs to know where the farm is at in terms of winter's feed supply and supply of quality feed for next spring. There are farms who are tight on feed supply, but do not have any quality feed for next spring, and that's a challenge. So, you just need to have a thought put into that. And I suppose from that, we're basically saying a plan needs to be developed. Currently, looking at the data that was there, the average winter feed supply is just over 4 months for most of the south, southeast, and the Midlands, which is just too tight. So, we'll go into the grass piece now, but we also need to keep an eye on the winter and next spring for feed supply. So if the expected rainfall keeps arriving, many farms in the green drought will and should go a long way to reaching their grass targets. A good supply on grass is possible with good grass growth, as long as the soil moisture deficit, though, is not too deep. What I mean by that is 50 or 60 millimeters of soil moisture deficit. Then with the rainfall coming, a good level of recovery in grass growth and grass supply is possible. But again, a plan needs to put into action here. And I suppose the first simple point of that plan is a 30-day rotation must be held. And that's not the rotation length looking back. That's the rotation looking forward. So what I mean by that, if you have a 30-hectare farm that's grazing 1 hectare a day or 7 hectares a week, it's probably an easier sum. And not to go any faster than that. The feed gap must be filled. The calves and heifers probably go off the milking platform. The surplus cows, culls, not in calves, some of them have to leave the farm to help reduce the feed demand, to help build grass supply. There's often hidden benefits with getting rid of those animals that people don't factor in, like the other cows perform better when they go. People forget that. There's more grass available for the animals that are left. You're eating less feed that's already tight. So It's a case of getting the average farm cover to increase by at least 100 kilos per hectare per week for the next 5 weeks to get close to 900 to 1,000 by October 1st. That's the plan. It needs to be tracked, and that you keep gaining here. Applying fertilizer and water slurry is part of this plan, but I will come to that. To go back just as a quick guide, it's very quick, but just as a guide, we're close to September 1st. Between September 1st and April 1st of next year, allowing for a 5-month winter and some silage being fed to build grass supply, the average dairy cow will eat 10 bales of silage. So if 5 dairy cows are sold off the farm that are either lame, cell count issues, boring poorly, call it what you want, not in calf, no future on the farm, that's saving 50 bales. 10 cows, 100 bales. For many farmers last spring, that would have been a valuable supply of silage. Now, for the farms in the brown drought area, which is mostly the southeast, Carlow, Kilkenny, Waterford, to a degree, certainly Wexford, Wicklow, yep, Kildare. The soil moisture deficits are much, much greater. Now, there are some farms in the Midlands and Munster also with large soil moisture deficits. What I mean by that is close to 90 or 100 mils. The green drought farms are generally 50, 60 mils of soil moisture deficits. So there's a lot of water short here, and a lot of rainfall required to get a significant level of recovery. And that's a big ask. I suppose the other challenge in these farms is the average farm cover is so low. And that means then the hill is steep. The plant has to start regrowing. The roots have to start regenerating. There's a bit of an ask in that. We've learned from that from 18. It's not a case of just rain falling and grass starting growing. There is going to be lulls in this. The feed has to stay in. But and the roots have to recover because some roots would have been shed during the drought to try and for the plant to survive. And then you don't have that root network as good then when the rainfall comes to get a good recovery. But for sheer simplicity, operating on a 35-day rotation for September and October will give a structured plan in terms of access to grass for the herd, a structured grazing plan for the farmer, and a structured grazing plan in terms of closing for October and into the first few days of November. So that's the advantage of keeping a rotation length like that in place. So 35 days. Right. I suppose in terms of fertilizer and storage decisions now, we need to set the scene here and just get things right here. So there's huge variation across the country, there's huge variation across farms, there's huge variation within farms. And this is where walking the farm and establishing what's growing and what's not growing is important. There are some paddocks that won't start growing until the old cover is removed. There are some paddocks with no cover on them at all and will take time to recover. There are other paddocks that are green and will start growing very, very fast. Stood in the field of reseeds this morning, the growth rate of it was phenomenal in the last day or two. So the variation is there and it's need to get a handle on that. But anyway, if we're growing somewhere about 35 kilograms of dry matter per hectare per day, 35, the mineralized nitrogen, that's the nitrogen from the soil as a result of rain falling onto warm soil, bugs getting going into overtime and release nitrogen. There's probably enough nitrogen there to sustain that level of growth rate or below it. Now, if the growth goes well above that, then there's a requirement for other forms of nitrogen, be it slurry or fertilizer. So for many farmers in the green drought, where grass growth is starting to increase after the rain and substantially, then you're going to get a kick from the nitrogen that comes from the soil to kick off. And then when the growth is well above 35, maybe into 50 or 60, hopefully, in a paddock where the base of the sward is green, then the application of somewhere about, as a guide, 20 units of nitrogen per acre being applied makes sense. So I suppose it's fine for me to say that there are farms who are tight on nitrogen fertilizer allowance, so the best growing paddocks on the farm should be the ones that are target where the growth rate is good enough to make use of that fertilizer. Then there's, of course, there are I suppose some farms who are not going to get that level of growth maybe, and you won't know that for a while, but making use of the slurry and the soil water on the farm has worked well during the drought. That's where it gets the best response. It's a friendlier form of nutrient to the plant. And this will have a role to play on many farms in the brown drought where grass growth is, well below average. And trying to make use of that. Right. And there is a level of slurry on many farms. The October 1st is the date for closure of the application of slurry. Making use of watery slurry though to graze paddocks. If it's available on the farm, you know, uh, this increases the availability of nitrogen capture, gives a good response to grass growth. So the fertilizer and slurry decisions will be governed by things like the level of soil moisture deficit, the level of grass recovery. Making use of the nitrogen that's on the farm already is a very good start. Where growth rate starts to pick up substantially, then fertilizer nitrogen has a big role to play in the next week or two. But I suppose as a guide, it has to be, growth rates up beyond 30, into the 50s and 60s is where the best return will be got from fertilizer nitrogen application. I don't need to remind you that it's not as cheap as it once was. So looking at then our farm feature, thanks to Aidan Lawless and the gang in Johnstown Castle, County Wexford. Wexford's got a tough doing this spring now with rainfall, and then a tough summer in terms of lack of rainfall. And there was legacies from last summer too. But anyway, thanks for Aidan for doing this. Some of you know that there's more than one herd here, but we focus on the spring calving herd, which is on the heavier part of the farm. It's stocked at 2.4, so they've managed to hold on pretty well now. From looking at the numbers here, to me, I accept that the swards on the farm are, do you think, the oldest is 2019, and there's a message in that in itself in terms of growth, and grass supply. But the average farm cover is just under 500. The pre-grazing yield was about just over 700. They grew 8 and the demand is 14, right? So the numbers are just poor, I suppose. But the current diet then is 6 kilos of meal, about 7 kilos of silage, and 6 kilos of grazed grass. The almonds are doing about 21.7 litres at 4.58 fat and 3.98 protein, which is not bad. And I suppose crucially, they're going scanning this week, and that's a message for everybody, especially where grass supply is tight, and more importantly, where the feed supply is tight. So looking then at the grazing management, they've opted for a 25-day rotation, which is fine because it still puts a structure in terms of grazing rotation. I suppose officially today is supposed to be 28, heading to the 30, and certainly into the high 30s or mid 30s by the end of September. That's the plan. They're spreading the collecting yard behind every second paddock or thereabouts. The recently the paddock has grown the most on the farm, as you can imagine. I'll come to that in a minute. So there was enough silage was made in 2026, but anyway, like many farms are beginning to eat into reserve, and the winter forage availability will really depend on what happens in grass supply in the autumn. Now, the soil moisture deficit, looking at the last map I saw for Wexford, was up close to 100. So it's going to take a fair bit of rainfall to pull this out of the fire, to get it back to a number. Just for the record, like, when you have a 25 mil soil moisture deficit, growth rate is still normal. When you get to 50, growth rate reduces substantially, I suppose, by about a third. And when you go beyond 60, 70, you're going over the cliff in terms of growth rate. And when you're up at 100, well, we won't even go there. So that's how the numbers work. So we need a nice bit of rainfall to get back into, 30, 40 mils of soil moisture deficit to give some level of growth, right? In terms of reseed, then it was sown on the 25th of May with a mixture of Aston Energy, Aston King, grasses, and Cloda and Dun Glow clover. Sprayed with Pro Clova on the 3rd of July. The field has been growing well. It is getting the soil water, and the growth rate is double as you would expect for the average of the farm. No surprises there, I suppose. But thanks to Aidan and the other Teagasc farms for the last few weeks for supplying the information. It's not easy to do this type of stuff when the farm is under pressure and in drought, and that puts the farmer under pressure as well. So thanks to the lads for doing this and sharing their information. So to finish off, then I suppose if you'd like to hear more from the Grass10 team, subscribe to the weekly Grass10 newsletter, which is available on the Grass10 page on the Teagasc public website, and the link to this newsletter is available in the description of this podcast. We'd like to thank all those who support the Grass10 campaign: AIB, Grassland Agro, Department of Food and Marine, FBD and the Farmers Journals. This has been your Grass10 update, and I will talk to you all next week. For the record, the Grass10 team has put a few videos together to help look at grazing infrastructure and improve the grass utilisation on the farm. That's available in the Grass10 newsletter as well. Thank you very much.